Hey everyone, and welcome to An Operator's Blog. In this episode, we will be going into the brass tacks of what on-ground hustle for 0 to 1 US go-to-market looks like as an India-based cross-border founder. Joining me today is Srinivasan Narayan, co-founder and CEO of Goodmeetings. Goodmeetings is an AI-powered meeting insights and automation platform that is designed to enhance the performance of customer-facing revenue teams. Srini is a repeat founder. Prior to Goodmeetings, he founded CohortPlus in the edtech space, which was acquired by upGrad. Over the last 3 years, I've seen Srini put in the hard grind to do a US go-to-market and really do it from scratch here. So there's a lot to learn and lots to unpack. Srini, it's so good to have you with us.
Thanks a lot, Soumitra, and thank you for the warm introduction. I don't think I could have introduced myself better.
Great. So let's get right down to it. So Srini, I just did a fireside chat a week back with one of my portfolio companies, Flight Base in Pune. And the whole main talking point there was how 3, 4, 5 member startup teams are now hitting millions in ARR, right? And it seems like we are entering a new age of how startups should get built, right? And you started kind of pre-chat GPT, pre-AI. So how is it impacting how you are doing things now at Goodmeetings? And what are you seeing some of these new teams do differently, right? Like how is this kind of a throughput happening now in startups?
That's an excellent question, Soumitra. And you know, I fundamentally believe that the entire, tech evolution, so to say, has happened in the form of waves, right? So if we go back, really back in history, the first biggest, I would say, revolution was the printing press, right? And printing press changed the way we, passed on information, the way we consumed information, right? And it still stays to this date, right? And then the next big revolution was the industrial revolution. It changed the way we did things, right? It changed the way, things were built, things were sold. The next really big revolution, I would say, was the internet revolution, right? And that changed the way, kind of we consumed information, that changed our lifestyles. I fundamentally believe that this AI revolution is the next big revolution, right? And whenever a big revolution happens, right, everything gets upended. And therefore, the way we build things, the way we sell things, the way we market things, everything is going to change, right? And when there is a seminal shift like this, you will always find companies that pocket disproportionate returns. New unicorns will be built out. New stellar companies will basically blaze their path. There is no two ways about it. And the simple reason for that is that when a revolution hits, right, incumbents are never the most comfortably positioned company to actually, kind of get disproportionate returns from that revolution, right? They've probably, made money from a past revolution, right? But they have reached a stage where they are in a certain form of or in a certain trajectory, and it is absolutely difficult for them to really come back, to the drawing board, build everything from scratch. Because, what has happened is they are making money, right? It is very difficult, or let's put it this way. Let's consider this as a war, right? If you are basically, kind of holding your, your regions together, it is very difficult. And when there is attack happening from every side, your basic instinct would be to protect your domain. And a lot of energy goes in doing that, because there will be, new incumbents who or new players who would be coming and, kind of attacking that fortress. You're trying to, kind of strengthen whatever defensible moat you have built, right? And therefore two things happen. A, either you will crumble under the pressure. B, what happens is, while you're trying to protect your territory, new markets are being created. And when new markets are being created, you really don't have the time the prioritization, or the wherewithal to actually go and capture those new markets. Both of which basically, kind of bode really well for startups, because startups come with zero baggage, with zero hangover. So they can actually build everything from scratch. So I fundamentally believe that, we are actually staring at a future where new tech companies will be built from scratch, right? And they will be creating new markets that you and me have probably not seen today, right? And both of us can become soothsayers, but currently as we stand, your guess is as good as mine, right? So new markets are going to get created, new entrepreneurs are going to sense the opportunity in those markets, and they are going to get disproportionate returns. There are no two ways about it.
No, very well said. And I think we'll go deep into how this is impacting the way Good Meetings is now getting built out, right? I think I'm sure you're entering kind of a new chapter. But let's take a step back, to your own backstory. Uh, Talk to us about, how kind of you started Good Meetings. I know you had an exit in Cohort Plus. You were in edtech, which is completely different from what you are doing now. Talk to us about those initial days.
The initial days of Good Meetings, right?
Yeah.
So I think you made a very pertinent point that I got an exit in Cohort Plus, and then what I'm doing with Good Meetings is completely different from what I did at Cohort Plus, and that's exactly the reason why I'm doing Good Meetings, right? So for the unversed, Cohort Plus was a social networking platform uh, for career aspirants, so people interested in new age careers like product management, data science, digital marketing, etc. And pure B2C product. Uh, with the ad driven business model, very India focused, right? So that company got acquired by upGrad. I worked for a year, integrated the team, the product, the operations. As a second time founder, maybe I was slightly more wiser, or let's just put it this way, that all the mistakes that I committed in my first startup, I at least knew that I don't want to commit those mistakes, right? uh, and to me, back then in 2019, right, I felt that building a B2C consumer internet company in India is very, very, I would say, uh, luck based, right? You might have the best insights, but there is a lot of luck beyond your control that has to, work in your favor for the company to actually scale. Also, back then, and I think it is by and large true even today, right? Consumer internet companies have found it really, really difficult to, kind of make big money to become profitable, right? And the reasons are very simple, right? I think the Indian consumerism wave has probably not really scaled as much as any one of us would have imagined. There are two numbers that I always track like a hawk, right? The first number is how many income taxpayers are there in India. And you would be bamboozled by that number, right? That number is like less than 7% of the Indian population. And that is like your total addressable market for any B2C product, because finally those are the people who are going to pay you money, right? So for me, what happened was I realized that there was this, I would say, bias that I had, that it would be really tough to make meaningful money out of a B2C consumer product in India. That's one. The second thing is, while Cohort Plus was my first out and out startup as a founder and CEO, I had worked in startups earlier. So it had been 10 years for me working in startups in the consumer internet space. And I really wanted to do something very different this time. The only reason was I felt that for me to actually have the fire in the belly, to actually have the, I would say, the tenacity to not give up, to actually ensure that I am excited every day. I wanted to do something very different from what I had done in the past 10 years, because I really, kind of, for me as a person, I excel when there are unknowns and I have to navigate through the fog of uncertainty and figure things out. The problem with working in 10 years in consumer internet was I really felt that there were so many building blocks that I had known. And this is very counterintuitive as an entrepreneur and as a professional, right? If you talk to any entrepreneur or professional, he or she would say that, hey, you know what? You worked for 10 years in a particular domain. This is when compounding will start kicking in. And this is when you should actually stay put, right? For you to, kind of start getting disproportionate returns from all the effort that you have put in. But, an entrepreneur always takes counterintuitive bets and succeeds when those counterintuitive bets come true. So for me, the counterintuitive bet was I really don't want to look at compounding, right? My inner voice told me that I had to do something really different, something that is, I would say, 180-degree different from what I had done earlier, for me to really, kind of enjoy every day that I was putting in at work, for me to get excited every day, get up and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to conquer the world today, regardless of, all the setbacks that I'm receiving. I felt that the only way I could do that was by actually taking something that was completely unknown to me and conquering it. So my second startup, Good Meetings, was everything that my first startup wasn't. First startup was pure B2C, second startup was B2B. First startup had a ad-driven business model, second startup had a, revenue-based, SaaS-based model. First startup was India-based, second startup, I had global ambitions from day one, right? So it was very clear that I wanted to do something different. And the idea came to me from my experience at upGrad, where, I could see that, upGrad is a very sales-driven organization as far as the GTM is concerned, right? And as the person who was heading the mobile app for upGrad, I also had P&L responsibilities under me. And that's when I was able to see sales from very close quarters. Until then, I had been a product and a tech guy, right? And what I saw, kind of, left me dumbstruck, because we talk about the, 10x engineer, we talk about the 10x designer, we talk about the 10x marketeer, but we don't talk about the 10x sales rep, right? And that was kind of startling for me, because I felt that technology had basically, kind of improved the lives of the marketeer, the developer, the data scientist, everyone. But somehow I felt that it was not helping improve the productivity of the sales rep. And as I started building the company, I realized that there are only two roles in any organization. If you actually, condense it, right? If you abstract everything out, all the bells and whistles, every company fundamentally has two roles. I call them dev and ref. Either you're building or you're selling, right? So if you help people build better, or you help people sell better, your product will always command respect. You will always be, kind of in high demand, right? Come what may, come what the economic conditions are. So that's when it struck me that, boosting the productivity of sales rep was so much, needed. And it was something that was evergreen, right? Any company has to sell, just like any company has to build. So if you're helping companies sell better, it doesn't matter what wave is coming. It doesn't matter what the economic conditions are. It doesn't matter what the US interest rates are, right? Because you will always be, kind of tapping into an inherent demand in the market. So for you to reach product market fit would be also so much easier. So all these things came together, and I decided to, take the plunge into Good Meetings.
And Shri, I think your journey with Good Meetings has been very interesting because I know you started at kind of the peak of the remote work, Zoom meetings, the hop-ins, all the, productivity startups really peaking at that time. And so you have seen two kind of disruptions, right? So one was, I think that settled down, right? So, I mean, a lot of the companies that started in the peak of 2020, a lot of their use cases turned out to be not sticky, right? That was one. And then
Yeah.
second is now with AI, right? With kind of things now changing in a very different way where building and selling needs to happen in different ways. Now in as you said today in 2025, right? Your first unique insight, how has that held, through these two disruptions that you've already seen in like what 5 years?
So I'll talk about, Soumitra, two insights. One that held true all this while, and one that kind of got washed, once the pandemic receded, right? So one of them found PMF, which is product market fit, and one found PMF, which is pandemic market fit. But obviously that dissolved over time, right? So there were two insights that, kind of propelled us to start Good Meetings. The first insight was that, whatever solutions we saw in the market, and this also holds true by and large even today, right? Which is the reason why we've been able to differentiate ourselves in the market, right? Within sales improvement, sales enablement, and sales productivity, most products have generally targeted the sales managers or the sales leaders, right? Uh, but the actual sale is being done by the sales rep, who in many ways sits at the bottom of the pyramid, right? Products have never targeted the sales rep, that guy who's rolling up his or her sleeves, getting into the trenches, getting his or her hands dirty. And we fundamentally believed, and this also came from my experience, that if you enable that guy to sell better, if you enable that guy to become way more productive, you are in many ways enabling the sales manager sitting on top of that person, and therefore the sales leader sitting on top of the sales manager. Now, that insight is a very deep insight. I mean, that's what I now believe 5 years down the line, right? That came from observing, how business was being done. That came from talking to many, many, many people. That came from observing how sales reps were selling their product, how sales managers were behaving, how sales leaders were behaving. That insight has held true over the last 4 years of our Good Meetings journey. Now, married to this insight was the second insight, which was that, sales is going to basically become by and large remote. More and more sales is going to happen on video. And therefore, a video based sales platform would really take off. Now, that has remained true, but not to an extent that we believe it should have been. It reached its peak during the pandemic, but once the pandemic receded, right, certain kind of sales still continue with that behavior, and there are some high-end sales which have actually moved to a offline world, right? So that's how we have also kind of, I would say, pivoted, navigated, moved around to ensure that our product remains relevant regardless of whatever is happening around us.
One of the questions that I get a lot, right, from especially -1 to 0 stage founders, and you were there kind of many years back, somebody who's thought of an idea, saw a market gap, now wants to start testing it out, wants to create some sort of an MVP, right? And I think that kind of paradigm itself has changed a lot, like over the last decade. And now with AI, right, it's completely changing, right? What are some of your philosophies or belief systems or approaches with respect to kind of MVPs, and even today, right, even at this scale, as you are testing out new features or maybe even like expanding the product line, uh, how do you approach MVPs in this age?
I would say sense of MVP has evolved so much in the last 4 years, right? That if you had asked me this question 4 years back when I was starting my second startup, it would have been very different, right? And now when I look back, I can myself trash that idea, right? So maybe 4 years down the line, this MVP that I'm telling you may also not be relevant. But currently, the biggest learning that we have had in the last 4 years is the following, right? From an MVP perspective. Now you have to understand that, you know, there are two kinds of products that a founder can build from scratch. One is a product where the founder is trying to create a market, you know, because the market does not exist. And the second is the founder is trying to tap an existing market and trying to find gaps in the existing market, white spaces, so that he or she can fit in, right? Now, the first case is a very, very high risk, high reward case, right? Creating markets is, a back-breaking, uphill, absolutely arduous task, which needs way, 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 way more money than you can imagine when you start out, right? If you are a, kind of exited founder who's made a massive fortune, then you can burn a part of your fortune and try to create that market, right? And if you're in that category, by all means, you have earned the right to take that risk. But for the followers of this podcast, my sense is that almost 99.9% of people who are following this podcast do not belong to that category, right? If you don't belong to that category, it is always advisable to basically find blue spots in a red ocean. Never try to go after creating a market from scratch, because it will take way more money than you would have ever imagined. 90% you will not be able to raise that kind of capital. Even if in an outside chance you're able to raise that capital, right? You would have diluted so much that finally, the kind of equity that you hold in the company would be too less for you to actually be motivated to build something for the long term. This begs the next question, which is how do you how do you find the blue spots in a red ocean, right? And this is a very counterintuitive thing again, Soumitra, right? Uh, so uh, many people might find it to be, I would say sacrilegious, but I can tell you that this has worked, right? And in my mind, this is the easiest and the fastest way to find product market fit in a B2B scenario, right? At least it has become a playbook, at least in our team, right? And when you say MVP, I feel that launch a small product so that you can reach PMF, correct? Because for us, for a -1 to 0 founder or a 0 to 1 founder, I think there are just two stages, pre-PMF and post-PMF, right? Now, let me answer how do you reach PMF, right? In the shortest possible time with the least amount of money burnt, right? This is what we learned, over the last few years. See, the first thing that you have to do is, if you have an idea, the worst thing that you can do is you feel that this is my problem and therefore this is the world's problem and I'll start building this up. 9 out of 10 times what happens is, if it is your problem, unfortunately, it is only your problem. Because when you start bottoms up, right, the problem is you're not in a position to scan the size of the market opportunity. So bottoms up approach in B2B scenarios to find PMF to build an MVP, I feel is not the right approach, but it is the most instinctive one. I have done that mistake, right? Even in B2C, I've done that mistake, right? And realized that after 2 years in, 3 years in, I realized that the market itself was not big enough, right? In my previous startup companies. And, after having burnt my hands multiple times, I realized that a top-down approach works really well. Now, what is a top-down approach? The top-down approach basically, mitigates all risks and helps you to reach PMF in the shortest possible time with the least amount of money burnt. The top-down approach states the following. Let's say you spot a problem to solve. Now, if it was bottom up, you would feel that this is my problem. How would I solve it for myself? You would try to solve it for yourself, then take it to a few founders, take it to a few companies which are similar to yours. You tell them, hey, you also have this problem, you will tune it and stuff. And then you'll start building on top of it, right? Oftentimes you'll falter that because, there's so many things you haven't seen. Now, in a top-down approach, what you do is, if you have a problem, what you do is you look at, kind of companies that have already solved problems like this earlier, right? And find out how big are these companies, right? If there are unicorns and decacorns, then you are in very good company, right? Because then the market opportunity has been proven. And there are companies that have become really big. There is no reason why you will not become big. So then you're going top down. So you know that you are going after a really big market, right? Now go after the big unicorns or decacorns and find out why are people paying money for that, that company. Oftentimes what happens is many unicorns and decacorns will have hundreds of features. But at its core, any client of that company is using only 2 or 3 features. And those are the core hero features of the product. So study those companies. Take, demos, take mock demos of those companies. Try to take a free trial and use that product. Try to talk to users of those companies. Your mind will start forming a pattern. you will figure out that these are the 2-3 features that this company basically excels in. That is why people pay major money. Now, those 2-3 features are hero features for which demand is always there. Otherwise, people would not be paying so much money. Those companies would not be making so much money. So what you should do is you should just build those 2-3 features out and achieve product parity with the unicorn or decacorn. That is your first step. Once you achieve product parity, you have to understand that those 2-3 features are catering to a demand which is so pervading that this company, this unicorn, decacorn, or any kind of really big company is not able to serve the entirety of the market. Right? So I'll give you a classic example. Right? Take the example of the CRM world. Right? You have a Salesforce, which is probably the largest SaaS company in the world. But even a Salesforce cannot capture the entire market, because in B2B, it is never a winner takes all market. Unlike B2C, where if you talk about a social network, Facebook is Facebook, right? The Instagram of India will be Instagram, right? The WhatsApp of India will be WhatsApp. If you try building a WhatsApp for India, you will fail. But if you look at the B2B scenario, a Salesforce, which is the largest CRM in the world and the largest SaaS company, it still cannot cater to everybody in the market. For every Salesforce, there is a HubSpot. For every HubSpot, there is a lead squad. For every lead squad, there is a pipe drive. Now, at its core, if you look at it, all these are CRMs. All these give those basic CRUD features. But so you basically start with those basic features and then you find your wedge of opportunity. Maybe those big companies are not basically targeting either a certain vertical as well as they should. And you start purpose building for that vertical. Right? Or maybe they are not targeting a certain segment of the market, right? You go after that segment of the market and build it, because the demand is proven. It is a all pervading demand. Otherwise, those features would of that big company would not be used by so many companies. So your demand is proven. So then you try to draw a wedge. You'll say that, okay, I'm just giving you an example. If today somebody had to build a CRM, I'll build a CRM which is Gen AI based, but I will do it only for fintech companies. Or I will only do it for SMBs and mid-market because Salesforce is going after large companies, right? That is how you are able to figure out the blue spots in a red ocean and reach your PMF in the easiest possible way, burning the least amount of money. And that's how your MVP should also be built. Within that, take any vertical or take any segment and take a really big company in that segment and blindly build for that company. That is the reason that company is coming to you, because the big company is not able to purpose build for that. Blindly build for that company, and all the features that you get for that company will be used by all the other companies in the vertical. Because if a big company in a particular vertical is entertaining you, it means that that is an unmet need, and every company in the vertical has that problem. And then you basically clear off that entire vertical.
I think the right word here is kind of being smart about it, right? Being market aware and not getting carried on by the narratives of kind of how a startup should be built, but really having that street smartness and shrewdness of saying, look, what's the most efficient way of validating things? Um, I think I want to go to now, the cross-border journey of good meetings, and of course now kind of entering the US over the last few years. I know you started in India, you got kind of good early traction in India, and then you kind of entered the US market. As you entered the US, how did the product change?
Because we've done this, so I would say for so many years now, 3-4 years, that instead of just telling how my product changed, because that might not be very, very useful to your audience, I probably want to share a framework for them to think through this, because I think that will be more useful, right? See, there are 3-4 things that differentiate the Indian market from the US market, right? And the first differentiator is trust. India is a low trust nation, right? And I'll give you a real life example of what low trust means. You and everybody who's watching this must have gone to a bank in India. And if you observe carefully, there would be this check writing counter. And in the check counting counter, basically there would be a pen which is tied to a thread. Because the problem is there is so much low trust in India that people feel that somebody will flick that pen. Pen is the most trivial, kind of stuff lying around in that bank, right? But that is how low trust India is. And when trust is low, right, what it basically, kind of reflects in every aspect of life, including the way your clients in India will use your product. So fundamentally, what will happen is in India, if you actually, kind of sell your product, you have to, kind of uh, basically give a free trial, because people will say, okay, this all looks good, but I don't trust you. So I want to use the product. You do the integration, you build this small feature for me. I will use it for 2 months. I will see actually if I'm deriving value. And if I derive value, I'll pay you money. Right? So therefore, you have to build a free trial, tailor it into your product. Right? The second thing with India is that, we are a capital deficit nation. So if you're selling to some company, because that company is also basically, kind of operating in low margins, collecting money from a client becomes very difficult. Again, low trust. So what happens is then the feature that you build is you pay money first after the trial, only then I'll activate your, activate your subscription, right? So low trust. So in US, it's a high trust nation, right? People believe what you say until you basically, kind of say something that you cannot back up, in which case they will never trust you. It's a high trust nation. And when a nation is high trust, what essentially happens is that, the way you build the product starts, kind of differing, because then you can actually, you don't have to care about free trials. You don't have to care about loading a wallet or getting, worrying about collections and stuff. People are okay to, kind of put their card and get things deducted, right? So then the nature of the product that you build changes that way. One. Second is design. You've stayed in India, you've stayed in the US, right? If you look at India, there is a lot of chaos, there is a lot of noise, there is a lot of litter, there is a lot of pollution, right? You go to the US. The first time I landed in the US, I was flabbergasted. Everything is neat and clean. There is not a speck of dust anywhere. Not a single piece of paper is lying anywhere. Everything looks so neat, clean, so manicured, so much, kind of structured. That is how your product should also be. In India, you can build a MVP which is very poor, which is poorly designed. But as long as the product is working, people will be like, okay, yeah. Right? In the US, if you have to launch, the look and feel of the product, the design of the product has to be top notch. If you don't have a top notch product, which is basically, really pleasing to the eye, really easy to use, right? If you don't do that, you've lost the battle. Regardless of how much value your product can add, if that is not there, right, you've, kind of lost the battle even before it has begun. I spoke about uh, trust. I spoke about design. The third important thing is the size of the market opportunity, the market appetite. I'll give you a real life example to, kind of again prove this, right? Now, the first time I went to the US through Goodmeetings, I traveled earlier. My undergrad batchmates, Suratkal batchmates said, hey, Srini is coming. Let's all, catch up for drinks. So they said, hey, there is this brewery in Halford Avenue in Sunnyvale. Why don't we catch up there? Right? I said, okay. So I went there. Now I don't drink beer, right? But, I just thought that it's a brewery like a brewery in Bangalore. You have Toit, you have Vapor. Now they do brew beer, but they also have gin, they also have whiskey, they have different kinds of alcohol, right? They also have non-alcoholic drinks. Then they also serve food. So I thought I'll have something non-alcoholic, right? I went to that brewery. And the only other liquid that was being served other than 3 types of beer was water. They only served 3 types of beer and water. And the whole, restaurant was full. Now, the reason that guy can do so is because the paying capacity in the US is super high. US is an absolute, consumerism to the power of consumerism market. I remember, I think it's still there. Every time I would land in San Francisco, right? The airport, international airport, I had to pay $8 to get a, luggage cart, right? The smart cart, you have to pay $8. And that is something that is, kind of strewn everywhere in the Indian airports. Wherever people can even make money, they will make money in the US. And people are ready to pay, right? Now, when that kind of a mindset drives a country, what happens is you can purpose build just for one single vertical and really go deep into that vertical and build $1 billion company, right? Now, that is the example of the brewery, as I said, 3 types of beer they served, and it was making good money. It had been there for ages. It was a very good profitable company, is what I got to know later. In India, if a guy basically opens a restaurant in the most, I would say, happening area in Bangalore, he still knows that even though he has a brewery, he will have to add gin, he will have to add whiskey, he'll have to add food, he'll have to add mocktails, because the paying capacity or the consuming capacity or the appetite to just have 3 kinds of beer, right, is just not that. He will end up with huge losses. And that reflects in the software world also. In the US, you can purpose build products, right? And just build for one vertical and blindly just build for that vertical and you'll make money. In India, that is not possible, right? In India, it's the other way around, right? If you go to a company, they will say, oh, you're doing this, you give me this, you give me this, you give me this. So that is one. And from the users end also, because our taxation is such that the procurement team says, I don't want 10 vendors for 10 different purposes. Get me one vendor who does everything. It's easy to onboard that vendor, easy for taxation purposes, easy for invoicing. I'll do this. And that's how business also changes then. You can purpose build for one vertical in the US because it is the deepest market or the market with the maximum appetite. Just pick one vertical, keep building for that vertical, keep chipping away, and you will get it done. Right? So we spoke about low trust versus high trust and how it changes the kind of product you build. We spoke about poor design and great design and why that matters. We spoke about the depth of the market opportunity. Right? The fourth thing that I would want to tell you is, in India, most people will prioritize their money over time. In US, people prioritize the time over money, right? I'll give you another real life example so that our viewers can get this really well. If you go to the US, right, even the really rich people, they do their own dishes, they clean up their own house, they do their own cooking, they have to pick up their kids from school, they have to do all this, themselves. In India, you have a cook, you have a maid, you have a driver. So basically, you have all the time in the world, right, to negotiate. In the US, the point is people value the time over money. So they will not be penny pinching. In India, that will happen, right? Now, this is another difference, right? So it's always, monetarily better to, kind of target markets where you don't have a maid coming in, you don't have a cook coming in, you don't have a driver coming in, right? Because those people will value their time over money and they will pay you a premium. Having said that, one thing that works for India is the fact that because you're a low cost nation, right? It is easy to get started in India. For all the talk of US being the richest market, the market with the deepest appetite, it is also the most intensely competitive market in the world. And the amount of money that you need to really make it big in the US is way, way more than the amount of money that you need to make it big in any other country of the world, including India. So founders have to keep this in mind, right? If you have just raised a couple of $1 million, that may not be enough for you to open up a full-fledged US GTM motion. So in that case, what helps is you start building from India, you start, kind of showing early shoots of growth in the US, and then use that story to raise another really big round. Post which I feel that it is super important that one of the key founders of the team actually moves to the US, because there is no other way to crack any market. The founder has to be in that market.
And Shrini, I think just to double click on that point, right? I think a question that I get a lot, and a scenario actually I see a lot, especially in US India cross border, is a lot of founders don't have any networks here in the US. They don't have, basically, they have no starting point, right? So
Yes.
they have a little, and I think you were in that boat. You had fairly good logos in India. You had kind of a good starting point, right? But then as you enter the US, right, even finding those first 3 to 5 design partners can be a big challenge. So what are some of
Yes.
those, and let's get very tactical around this. What are the playbooks? How are you how have you done it? How have you seen people do it? And now you're part of SaaS Boomi and a lot of other communities as well, right? What are those 3 or 5 things that the cross-border founders can do?
It's an excellent question. So basically, and I learned it from my first startup. So in my first startup, I actually made a trip to the US, right? I stayed in the US for around 10 days. First 2 days went off in overcoming jet lag. Then I only had, 5 days in hand, out of which 2 days were weekend. And we all know that nobody in the US works on the weekend. And then by the time I realized that I had to do, or this was not working out, I was on my way back, and I came back in 10 days, and I fell sick. It was the worst experience of my life, Samitra, but it taught me a lot of things. The next time through good meetings, when I actually decided to, kind of make a trip to the US, the first thing that I did was give myself a month. I said nothing happens in 10 days. At least 1 month to 2 months, you have to station yourself to get a feel of the place, right? And what I did was basically, even 3 4 weeks before I could, kind of, I booked my ticket. I knew that I'm going on this date. So everything has to work, you know, behind that date, because that date is fixed. That date is frozen. I've paid money now. I cannot go back. And then I had 3 weeks in hand. And what I did was basically reach out to every guy I knew in my network, my school friend, my undergrad friend, my MBA friend, my investors, everyone, saying, I am going there. I want to build a company that can actually grow big, that has its footprints in the US. Do you know anyone who can help me out? Absolutely unabashedly, right? And then I got some introductions, right? So by the time I boarded my flight 3 weeks hence, I had around 20 meetings which were basically scheduled on my calendar. When you have 20 meetings scheduled on your calendar and every day you're doing 2 3 meetings, right? You are actually spending a lot of quality time. Not everyone would be useful, but always remember, and this is something that I learned from one of my investors who gave me a very good advice. He said, Shini, always look at building relationships. Transactions are but a byproduct of those relationships. Transactions may happen, may not happen, right? And trust me, Soumitra, that has really stood me in very good stead. I started meeting people really to, kind of tell them about what I'm doing, and not really trying to sell my product, right? But really kind of building a relationship, because these guys were way ahead of me as far as US GTM was concerned. I wanted to learn from them, right? I wanted to absorb some of the great, kind of stuff that they had learned over the years. And, I wouldn't say that I did not get a business from them, but that was a byproduct, right? And trust me, the more you meet people, the more you get exposed to, that surrounding those kind of people, the more you realize what works and what doesn't work in the US, right? That's a very good starting point. So what I would tell people is, reach out to every damn guy in your network and tell them that you're going to the US for a good 2 months. You want to meet people, you want to absorb the milieu, the culture, right? Can they put you in touch with someone, right? And see, because I feel that all this works in the form of concentric circles. You will know someone, and he is your inner core network, he or she. Now, he or she will know someone who is the next concentric circle. So he will introduce you to that person. That works really well, right? That's how I got around 15 of my first 20 meetings scheduled. The remaining five I actually got through cold emails, right? I would figure out people who I thought were relevant. I would reach out to them on LinkedIn with a very, very honest, story saying, I am an entrepreneur. I want to make it big. I am like you were few years back. This is the problem I'm facing. I am coming to the US. Can you spare 30 minutes, right, for a coffee? Any place, anytime, as per your convenience. And lo and behold, people have answered it, right? That's how you build network. You get better core set of 6, 7 people. Those 6, 7 people will introduce to 6, 7 more people. Then those 6, 7 people will introduce to 6, 7 more people. And that's how you expand. But please get everything scheduled on the calendar. Only if it is on the calendar will it work. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And that's how you get your first set of US customers, right? You may actually end up getting US VCs, right? You may end up getting a lot of mentors, right? So I always say that while I kept doing this, and by the third trip, I knew that there were three kinds of people. First was potential clients, right? The second was basically VCs, right? And the third were basically mentors or people who have been there, done that, right? Who are happy to, kind of help you out in many ways.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it all comes down to relationship building, right? And I think that's where
Yes.
kind of people need to frame that. I think finally to kind of close the loop on where we began, right? So now Good Meetings and you as a founder are going up against these new age AI native teams, 4 or 5 people getting together, getting to 3 to 5 million ARR. How are you doing things differently?
There are two parts to that answer, Soumitra, right? The first part to that answer is, you know, what is that core insight on top of which you're building your product? It doesn't matter whether you're competing with a 500-member team or a 5-member team or a 10-member team. What is that core insight that is driving you? And you will only get that core insight by actually talking to as many customers as possible, right? And I see this is a very simple thing. It may sound to be very, I would say, anticlimactic, but I have always realized the more time I spend with my customer, right, the more confident I am that I am going to, kind of crack this. So every time I feel that something is not working, I always go back and check my last 15, 20 days and I see how many times have I actually gotten on a call with my customer. I realized I was not doing it for the past 2, 3 weeks for various reasons. I was sick. Tomorrow I'm flying out to Delhi because I have to meet a few customers, right? I can tell you, right? I can give any kind of gyan that, oh, I am building this, the world is building this, I am using Gen AI, somebody else is not. Fundamentally, it boils down to only one thing. How many times have you spoken to your customer in the last 4 weeks? And what is that core insight you have derived from all those discussions? As long as you're confident on your core insight, as long as you're confident that this has genuinely come from a customer, I think you are in good shape. Everything else will fall in place here. How many times? I'll tell you, Soumitra, I have spoken to so many founders in my network, and I always ask them, tell me one thing. When was the last time you really sat with your customer? You actually went to really meet that customer, though there was no renewal, that was coming up. There was nothing, right? He probably renewed just 2 months back, but you went and sat with him to really understand how is he using the product. You peeped over his or her shoulder to see how he's using the product. You genuinely ask that person for feedback. And trust me, I am amazed that, there are so few people who actually do that. And I am not saying that I have gained expertise, but this is one thing I have learned. Every time I feel lost, I just go back and either dial my customer in or I just book a ticket and go and sit with him. And this is one thing that really works, Soumitra, I can tell you, right? Just show up and just show up and go and sit in front of your customer. You know, in early stages, what is your biggest defensible moat? right? Your biggest defensible moat is as a founder, you can show up, right? And that you will be there when the customer, whenever the customer needs you, and that the customer has seen you.
So very well said. I think it reminds me of what Jason Lemkin says a lot of times, right? Like whenever you are stuck, there is no growth, it's hard to raise capital, any problem in any startup, he says the number one thing is go back, spend more time with your customers.
Right? And I'll also tell you one more hack. There are many people who feel guilty, right? Like I travel to US, I travel to, different parts of the world wherever our customers are. And many of them feel guilty that, hey, you know what, Srini is only coming to meet me. And there are many times when I've only gone to meet them. And they will say, Srini, just don't come to meet me, right? Doesn't make sense, right? We can do this over a phone call or a Zoom call, right? And to what I know that I'm going only to meet him, but I will not disclose that. And trust me, every time I have gone to his or her office, sat down, had tea with them, had a good heart to heart discussion, it has changed the way I see things. So just travel. In fact, we have set out a separate budget called travel budget, right? Where we say that, that money has to be used. You might save on everything else, save on your server costs, save on your, save on your whatever company motivation costs or whatever, right? Save on everything else, but the travel budget has to be used. You have to go and sit in front of your customer.
No, this has been an amazing conversation, Srini. I think thanks for keeping it very real. I did not expect anything else from you, and that's why I was very, very excited to kind of do this. And I think a lot of brass tacks, a lot of operating learnings, and really good distillation of frameworks. So thank you so much for taking your time.
Thanks a lot, Soumitra. It was fun chatting with you as it has always been. Cheers.